Okay, so moving along to network effects. In terms of this chapter, I would say that this is probably more on the economic side than I'd like to be. So I'm gonna, try my best here, but this is definitely one of the ones that falls really, really heavily on the economics versus computer science side. It's really on the econ side. So, let's start by, kind of recapping last chapter with the marbles, where we had informational effects that basically ended up in cascades that allowed us to imitate the behavior of others. It's also possible for people to imitate others due to some direct benefit when they align their behavior with others. So, for example, technology adoption, an operating system. If everybody's using that operating system, or a significant group of people are, then that certainly helps, and it gives a benefit because there's more information out there on the OS, better support. Same with social media site adoption. If there are more people on a social media platform, probably receive more benefit from it. Styles and fashion, if it's the cool thing to wear, of course I'm beyond cool, but if I was still cool teenager, then adopting clothing styles certainly brings a benefit to it. So we're going to be talking about externalities, and basically it's a situation in which the welfare of the individual is affected by the action of others. We're going to generally discuss positive benefits associated with products, but there are some negative benefits. For example, we talked about the traffic, and spending time in traffic was definitely a negative effect. It's important to note that not everything is an externality. The key part is the effect has to be uncompensated. The authors give an example of drinking a can of Diet Coke, then there's one less can of Diet Coke for the rest of the world to consume. So you decrease the welfare of others by your action. But in this case, in order to drink that can of Diet Coke, you have to pay for it. And if you pay what it costs to make another can of Diet Coke, then you have actually compensated the rest of the world for your action. That's the example that they provide in the text. So what if we don't have these network effects? Well, what does the economy look like? So we're looking at the market for an individual product or a good as they're described in the text. And when consumers don't care how many others use it, then there's no network effect. For example, I purchased some bread today. I don't care how many other people have that bread, although, it's pretty good bread. We represent the consumers here as a set of all real numbers in the interval strictly between 0 and 1. Now that is infinite, but the authors say, well, we're going to treat it as finite. It's like, okay, I won't quibble with you mathematically, but I can tell you the reals between 0 and 1 are infinite. Each consumer wants at most one unit of the good. Each consumer has a personal intrinsic interest in obtaining the good that can vary from one consumer to another. When there are no network effects at work, we model consumers' willingness to pay as being determined entirely by his or her intrinsic interest. When you have a network effect, the willingness to pay is based on the intrinsic interest plus the number of people who are using the good as some function of the number of people using it. So with no network effects, each consumer's interest in the good is specified by a single reservation price. That is the maximum amount he or she is willing to pay for a unit of the good. We denote this by R of X and assume that the individuals are arranged in the interval between 0 and 1 in order of decreasing reservation prices. So the reservation price for the individual closest to 0 is going to be the highest. If consumer X has a higher reservation price than Y, then X is going to be less than Y. So R is strictly decreasing as are the reservation price. As you get closer to 1, it gets closer to 0. If the market price is P, then everyone with a reservation price of at least P will buy it. When there are no network effects, the demand for a product at a fixed market price P can be found by locating the point where the curve Y is equal to Rx intersects the horizontal line Y equal P in this figure. This means that all consumers between 0 and X will buy the product and all consumers above X don't. So an X fraction of the population buys the product. Suppose that this good can be produced at a constant cost of P star per unit. And, again, this is kind of an assumption that they've made, and the producers are willing to supply any amount of the good at a price P star and none of the good at any price below P star. And that there are enough producers in the market that they will, invariably converge on P star. Now, in actuality, at least in the United States, that doesn't seem to happen as much. We certainly have like limited suppliers for certain goods. So P star will be between the highest and lowest reservation prices. And then we can find X star between 0 and 1 such that R of X star is equal to P star, and that's the equilibrium quantity of the good. X star represents an equilibrium in the population's consumption of the good. If less than an X star fraction of the population purchased the good, then there would be consumers who have not purchased but would have an incentive to do so because the reservation price is above P star. In other words, there would be upward pressure on the consumption of the product since there's a portion of the population that would not have purchased, but they kind of wish they had. Likewise, if more than X star population of the fraction of the population purchased the good, there would be consumers who purchased the good but experience a little bit of buyer's regret because the reservation price is below P. In this case, we would have downward pressure on the consumption of the good, buyer's remorse. So economy with network effects. So here we're going to add in not just the intrinsic interest of the consumer, but a direct benefit to the consumer for having it. For example, social media, there's the intrinsic interest, but there's also a direct benefit based on how many people are on that social media platform. So when a Z fraction of the population is using the good, reservation price for consumer X is equal to R of X times F of Z. R of X is the same as before. It's that intrinsic interest of the consumer X in the good. And F of Z is an increasing function. So this one increases. The more people who adopt it, the more the benefit. This is the benefit from the consumer from having a Z fraction of the population use the goods. Now we're going to assume F of 0 is equal to 0. Basically, there's no value in it unless someone purchases it. You can think of that as a website or a social media site. If nobody's on the social media site, then there's no value to it. R of 1 is equal to 0. As the consumers increase, the willingness to pay for the last consumer is going to be, darn close to 0. If the price of the good is P star and that consumer X expects a Z fraction of the population will use the good, then we want X. Then X will want to purchase provided that R of X times F of Z is greater than P star. So the fraction of the population using the good is Z, and then it's a self-fulfilling expectation equilibrium. If each consumer making a purchasing decision based on the expectation, then the fraction of people who actually purchase is in fact Z. If Z is equal to 0, then the reservation price for each consumer is R of X times F of 0, which we defined as 0. So no one's going to purchase it, and that shared expectation is filled. If it goes above 0 with the quantity Z strictly between 0 and 1, it also forms a self-fulfilling expectation in the equilibrium. And P is equal to R of Z times F of Z. So to find whether or not equilibria exists, we need to know the form of the functions R and F in order to analyze the equation. So say we have R is equal to 1 minus X and F of Z is equal to Z. Here R of Z times F of Z is equal to Z times 1 minus Z, which is Z minus Z squared. That gives you that inverted parabolic shape, and the maximum occurs at 1/2 there. If P star is greater than 1/4 is where the maximum value of the price is located. Then there's no solution. If it's between 0 and 1/4, then we get 3 equilibria, and they occur at 0, Z, and Z double prime. As P star drops, the high equilibrium moves to the right, but the low equilibrium moves to the left. So we have three equilibria in this function: 0, z prime, and z double prime. We discussed 0. If no one purchases it, well, then no one is going to make something that no one's going to purchase. Z double prime is actually a strong stability point. If slightly more than that purchase it, it gets pushed down towards Z double prime. If slightly less, then we push up towards it. Z prime is an unstable point, unstable equilibrium, and a critical or a tipping point. If there's slightly less people purchase it, then we tend down towards 0. Nobody's going to really want unless there's that critical mass. If it's slightly more, then we actually trend upward towards Z double prime. So it's a critical point. That's the hump you need to get over to succeed. The picture here is from the section on the dynamic versus the static view, which gives a derivation of Z hat as an outcome, which is a function of Z, the people who purchase it. Here you can see that less than Z prime goes to 0 and greater than Z prime goes to Z double prime. Granovetter and Schelling studied this back in the 1970s to model how a population might react dynamically to a network effect. They're interested in the number of people participating in a given activity with network effects and whether that would tend to grow or shrink over time. They study an older technology, but you can think of their work as modeling social media platform adoption. And in fact, it still works for that. The model is still the same, even if participation is able to be undone in social media. For example, I could delete my Twitter account, or remove traces of my activity on social media. I could just get off the platform. Of course, that's sometimes easier said than done because people save things. So if you make a real big boo-boo, it's kind of hard to undo. But assume that you haven't made any boo-boos, and then you can quietly disappear. The price here is the level of effort required to participate, since a lot of these platforms are free. But what is the price you pay? It's the time that you invest in the social media platform. So we can say that Z0 is the initial audience size at time 0, and a function G maps the expectations outcome. At each time period T, after 0, people evaluate whether to participate based on a shared expectation that the audience size will be the same as what it was the previous period. That means that Z1 is G of Z0 and Z2 is G of Z1, etc. The audience behaves in this myopic way. That is, they evaluate the benefits of participation as though the future will be the same as the present. That's not always the case. In this image, you can see how the curve acts with an audience moving away from the stability point 1, the first place where it crosses the axis, and moving upwards towards the second stability point. Industries with network goods: if your product price is too high, then you won't get an audience until the price becomes viable. After you reach the initial tipping point, Z prime, you'll get to Z double prime as your final stability point. The question is how to get a large enough group to adopt the product. And there are different things like free trials, which drive us all nuts, influencers, probably again drive us nuts. And then, things like saying the initial price below the cost, like the Xbox hardware when it first came out. So network effects and competitions: what happens if you have two firms that are developing products with network effects? For example, operating systems or multiple browsers, streaming platforms, social media sites. There's lots of places where there's competition. Well, one product generally ends up dominating the market. And the product that first gets over its own tipping point attracts many of the consumers, and this may make the competing product less attractive. So the market tends to favor the product that gets past the tipping point first. This doesn't necessarily mean first with the worst. You could have a really bad product that's out there on the market first that no one really adopts. It's who gets past that tipping point. A product in a secondary position can also improve, and a good product can become worse. Sometimes you also have cases where a product has value even if no one's using it. For example, a network game that has solitary levels that you can complete without being networked. In this instance, the product has some value at f of 0, and it's greater than 0. So this model will also have stability points at 0, Z prime, and Z double prime as well. When looking at plots of functions such as this one for R of x equal 1 minus x and f of z is equal to 1 plus az squared, you can see this one actually has a slow and steady growth and up until the tipping point, and then shifting the price slightly can allow for more significant growth that we see as we move to the right on the model. So the last part of the chapter deals with the Farol Bar Problem, and this is a famous game theory problem. And there aren't any cool videos of it, or I would have recommended a cool video. The one I found was a robotic voice reading the Wikipedia article. So hopefully I can do a little bit better than that, although I might not get all the details. The point with this problem is there can be a positive and negative externalities working together in the same market. So this is an actual bar that's located in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and they used to have live music every Thursday evening. There were about 100 people who were interested in attending the events, but the bar only had seating for 60. If more than 60 people showed up, then no one really had any fun. You know, I'm into a crowded bar or crowded venue. It's not fun. There's no place to sit. Service slows down, and you're bumping into people all night. If less than 60 people show up, then the bar and the band doesn't make as much money. The paradox here is less than 60% of the population go to the bar. They'll all have more fun if they stayed at home. If more than 60% go to the bar, they'll have less fun than if they stayed at home. So and by the way, I should mention the photos by John Fellon, and that's his own work. There was an ask to have that attributed, so I have done so. But basically, with this problem, the payoffs decrease as the number of participants increase. Payoffs up until 60 are good, they're positive, and they're negative after you get to the magical number of 60 folks. There are negative externalities for this bar, and that poses problems for our shared expectation. There's no deterministic pure strategy that's symmetric. The strategy suggests that it's not crowded, everybody goes, and it ends up being crowded and no one has fun. If the strategy suggests that it's crowded, no one will show up and no one has any fun at all. So if everyone uses a pure deterministic strategy that's symmetric, the same strategy for all players, it's guaranteed to fail no matter what it is. If the strategy suggests it won't be crowded, everybody goes, and it will be crowded. But if the strategy suggests it'll be crowded, nobody will go, and then it will not be crowded, but again, no one will have any fun. So each person really has two possible strategies: go to the bar or stay at home. And it kind of in some ways corresponds to the problem that we had with the Hawks and the Ducks, if we reduce it down to a two-player problem. If the player chooses to stay, they receive a stay at home, they receive a payoff of 0. It doesn't matter whether it was a good show or not. If the player chooses go, then they receive a payoff x greater than 0 when at most 60 people choose go, and a payoff of minus y when more than 60 people go. We can actually use mixed strategies and choose to go with probability p. Now that depends on the payoffs of x and minus y. If minus y is really negative, then it may not be worth going. But when x is equal to y, then p is equal to 0.6 will work. So 60% chance we'll go. We can roll some dice to see if we'll go to the pub. If y, the negative payoff, is greater than x, then probability we should go should be less than 60%. If y is less than x, then the probability we should go should be greater than 60%. And of course, you can play this game repeatedly. In this case, you would have a forecasting rule that can be based upon what happened the prior Thursday, or even perhaps keeping track of it further back than that. And forecasting rule is any function that maps the past history of play to prediction about the actions that all other players will take in the future. And they can actually be very complex in principle, and there are actually a lot of simulations that make use of advanced forecasting rules. If everybody uses the same rule, then you end up with bad predictions. But if you have a mix of rules, you can end up with quite complex behavior. But what's interesting is with most mixes of the forecasting models, the audience converges to around 60. And finally, I'd be remiss, since we're talking about pubs with music, if I didn't mention PJ's Lagerhouse in beautiful Detroit, Michigan. PJ was the guy who owned the record store that I used to hang out at when I was an undergraduate. And PJ would let me stay up there at the record store all day and listen to music, even if I wasn't buying anything. So he's a really cool guy and made my undergraduate experience much better. His co-owner actually had a master's degree in mathematics, so I actually learned a lot of my mathematics up at the record shop. So it had two different benefits, and now he owns a live music venue that has some pretty cool shows from time to time. I don't get back that way very frequently, but if you're in there, check it out. Definitely looks like he has better shows than the Farol Bar. So that's the lecture for today. Hope you enjoyed it.